The sun was setting over the city skyline as James Montgomery closed his laptop and rubbed his tired eyes. Another successful day at the office, another deal closed that would add millions to his already impressive fortune. But looking at the framed photo on his desk, he was reminded that true wealth had nothing to do with the numbers in his bank account. "Time to go home," he said to himself, picking up his phone to call his wife. "Hey, honey," Ava's warm voice answered. "The kids are asking if we're still going out for dinner tonight." James smiled. Despite his busy schedule running one of the country's most successful tech companies, family dinner night was sacred. "Absolutely. Tell them to be ready by 7. Back at their spacious home in the suburbs, 14-year-old Zoe was sprawled on the couch scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when her father walked in. Meanwhile, 10-year-old David was playing a video game, his tongue sticking out in concentration. "Hey, you two, ready for dinner?" James asked, loosening his tie. "Where are we going?" David asked, eyes still glued to the screen. "I thought we'd try that new place downtown." The Silver Spoon. This caught Zoe's attention. "Isn't that the super fancy restaurant everyone's talking about? Do I need to change?" She glanced down at her casual jeans and sweater. James shook his head. "Nope, we're going casual tonight. Your mom and I are tired of those stuffy business dinners where everyone's too worried about using the right fork to actually enjoy the food." What James didn't mention was that the Silver Spoon was now technically theirs. 3 weeks ago, his investment company had quietly purchased the restaurant chain, adding it to their growing hospitality portfolio. But he had insisted on keeping the acquisition private for now. He wanted to experience the restaurant as a regular customer first to see what it was really like without the special treatment that inevitably came when people recognize his name. "I don't understand why you wear those old jeans when you could buy, like, the whole mall," Zoe said, eyeing her father's casual outfit. James laughed. "Money doesn't mean much if it changes who you are, kiddo." Ava appeared in the doorway, looking comfortable in a simple dress and flat shoes. Her natural hair was pulled back in a headband, and she wore minimal makeup. Like her husband, she preferred to stay under the radar despite their wealth. "Ready?" she asked, grabbing her purse. The family piled into James's least flashy car, a modest SUV that wouldn't turn heads. As they drove downtown, David chatted excitedly about his science project, while Zoe told them about drama in her friend group. These normal family moments were what James treasured most. The Montgomery family had worked hard to stay grounded despite their extraordinary circumstances. James had built his tech company from nothing, starting in his college dorm room and eventually creating software that revolutionized how businesses handled data security. The journey from struggling entrepreneur to billionaire had happened faster than anyone expected, but he and Ava had made a pact early on. They wouldn't let money change their core values. They pulled up to the restaurant, choosing to self-park rather than use the valet service. The Silver Spoon's elegant facade glowed with warm lighting, and through the windows, they could see well-dressed patrons enjoying their meals. "Looks fancy," David whispered, suddenly nervous. James squeezed his shoulder. "Food is food, buddy. We belong anywhere we choose to go." As they approached the entrance, a couple exiting the restaurant did a double-take at James, but he pretended not to notice. It happened occasionally, someone recognizing him from a business magazine or news segment. But here in this upscale neighborhood across town from where they usually dined, he hoped they could enjoy a peaceful meal without attention. "Table for 4, please," James said politely to the host, who smiled and reached for menus. Little did the Montgomery family know that their quiet dinner was about to become anything but peaceful. As they followed the host inside, a waitress named Melissa glanced their way, made a quick judgment, and set in motion a chain of events that would change multiple lives forever. Melissa Porter adjusted her black apron and quickly checked her reflection in the polished surface of a serving tray. At 28, she'd been working at the Silver Spoon long enough to know which tables tipped well and which weren't worth her extra effort. 5 years of serving wealthy customers had taught her to spot designer clothes and expensive watches from across the room. "Table 7 needs more wine," called out Thomas, one of the busboys. "On it," Melissa replied, grabbing an expensive bottle from the wine cooler. She flashed her practiced smile as she approached the table of 4 business executives in tailored suits. These were her kind of customers, the ones who didn't look at prices on the menu and left generous tips. "Another round of drinks for table 12, the bartender announced as Melissa passed by. She glanced at table 12. An older couple celebrating what looked like an anniversary, both dressed impeccably. The diamond necklace on the woman probably cost more than Melissa's yearly salary. Perfect. As she efficiently moved between her assigned tables, Melissa's eyes darted to the entrance where the host was leading in a new family of 4. Her smile faltered slightly. The man wore worn jeans and a simple button-up shirt with no tie. The woman beside him had on a casual dress that Melissa was pretty sure she'd seen something similar at the mall. Their 2 children were equally underdressed for a restaurant where the average dinner cost over $200 per person. "Lisa," Melissa hissed to the host as she passed by. "Where are you seating them?" Lisa looked confused. "Table 15. It's the next available one." "Table 15? That's by the window with the city view," Melissa whispered. "Put them by the kitchen. Table 23 is open." "But they have a reservation under Montgomery," Lisa replied, checking her tablet. Melissa rolled her eyes. "Probably made it online without reading about the dress code. Trust me, they're not going to order enough to justify a prime table." Lisa hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine, I'll change it." The Montgomery family followed the host, who smoothly changed direction, leading them past the elegant central dining area toward the back of the restaurant. James raised an eyebrow as they approached a small table wedged between the swinging kitchen doors and the waitstaff station. "Your table, sir," Lisa said, not quite meeting their eyes as she placed the menus down. "Thank you," Amber said politely, though she exchanged a quick glance with her husband. From across the room, Melissa watched as the family settled into their seats. David, their young son, winced as a kitchen door swung open, narrowly missing his chair and releasing a loud clatter of dishes. "I'll take that table," Melissa told the floor manager, calculating that she could provide minimal service while focusing on her better clients. Besides, she needed to make up for last night's poor tips. She waited a full 5 minutes before approaching their table, taking her time to refill water glasses for her other customers first. "Welcome to the Silver Spoon," she said flatly when she finally reached them. "Can I start you with some drinks? Tap water, perhaps?" She emphasized the word tap, not offering the sparkling water she suggested to her other tables. "Actually, we'd love to try your house specialty cocktail for my wife and me," James said warmly. "And maybe some fancy lemonades for the kids." Melissa's smile tightened. The house cocktails were $24 each. "I'll need to see ID," she said, despite James clearly being in his 40s. James pulled out his driver's license without complaint. Melissa glanced at it, noting the address in an upscale neighborhood, but figured it must be fake or outdated. People who actually lived there wouldn't dress like this to dine out. "Also," Ava added gently, "we noticed several empty tables by the windows. Would it be possible for us to move to one of those? The kitchen door is quite noisy." Melissa's face hardened. "I'm sorry, but all those tables are reserved for our regular customers." "I see," James said, his expression unreadable. As Melissa walked away to place their drink orders, she didn't notice the restaurant manager's widened eyes as he spotted the family from across the room. She didn't see him frantically checking the reservation system on his tablet. And she certainly didn't realize that her entire career was about to hang in the balance of how she handled the next 30 minutes. The kitchen door swung open again, nearly hitting David's chair for the 3rd time since they'd been seated. He flinched, almost spilling his fancy lemonade that had arrived 15 minutes after they ordered it. "You okay, buddy?" James asked, putting a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Yeah," David mumbled, but his eyes kept darting nervously to the door. Zoe looked up from her phone. "This is ridiculous, Dad. We've been waiting forever, and that waitress keeps ignoring us." "Let's give her a little more time," Ava said, always the peacemaker. But even she was growing frustrated. They had been sitting for almost 30 minutes, and while Melissa had taken their food order, she hadn't returned with bread or appetizers like the other tables had received. From across the dining room, they could see Melissa laughing with the businessmen at table 7, refreshing their drinks and bringing them extra sides. Whenever she passed near the Montgomerys, she seemed not to notice their attempts to get her attention. "The reviews for this place were amazing," James said quietly. "But the service, Finally, Melissa appeared with their appetizers. She placed the plates down without a word, then started to walk away. "Excuse me," James called after her. "We ordered the calamari as well." Melissa turned back with a tight smile. "I'll check on that for you." But her tone suggested she didn't believe them. "And could we possibly get some bread for the table?" Ava added. "Everyone else seems to have some." "We're running low tonight," Melissa replied, though James could clearly see a busboy delivering fresh bread baskets to 3 other tables. 10 more minutes passed before their main courses arrived. David's chicken fingers were cold in the middle. Zoe's pasta had clearly been sitting under a heat lamp too long, the sauce dried and crusty around the edges. James's steak, which he'd ordered medium rare, was well done and tough. Only Ava's salad was acceptable, though it was missing half the ingredients listed on the menu. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Melissa asked, the question sounding like a formality as she was already stepping away. "Actually," James said firmly but politely, "my son's chicken is undercooked and my steak is overcooked. Would it be possible to have these redone?" Melissa's smile vanished. "The chicken is pre-cooked, sir. It's supposed to be like that." "Raw in the middle?" James questioned. "Our chef prepares it to industry standards," she replied stiffly. "And I'm afraid if you ordered your steak incorrectly, we'll have to charge you for a new one." Zoe put down her fork in disgust. "Dad, let's just go somewhere else." "No," James said calmly. "We have as much right to good service as anyone else in this restaurant." Other diners were starting to glance their way as Melissa's voice grew louder. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere with a different price point." James took a deep breath, keeping his composure. "Could we speak to the manager, please?" "I've been doing this job for 5 years," Melissa hissed, leaning closer. "I know when people come in here just to say they've been. If you can't afford it, you shouldn't pretend." Ava reached for her husband's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. They'd faced this kind of treatment before, people assuming they couldn't afford things, security guards following them in high-end stores, valets ignoring them in favor of white customers. "We'd still like to speak to your manager," James insisted. "Fine." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "But while we wait, perhaps you could explain these charges." She slapped their bill on the table. The total was nearly $400, including items they hadn't ordered, extra sides, premium substitutions, and an expensive bottle of wine. "We didn't order half of this," Ava pointed out, scanning the receipt. "Are you accusing me of lying?" Melissa's voice rose sharply, causing nearby conversations to stop. "I've had enough of this. Either pay the bill or leave." Several other diners were openly staring now. "We're happy to pay for what we ordered," James said firmly, "not for things we didn't." "That's it." Melissa threw her hands up dramatically. "I need this table for real customers. Please leave immediately before I call security." David's lower lip trembled as he looked at his parents. Zoe's face burned with embarrassment as other teenagers at a nearby table whispered and pointed. As the Montgomery family began gathering their things, a tall man in a tailored suit rushed across the dining room, his face pale with horror. "What is going on here?" he demanded, looking between Melissa and the family. "I'm handling a situation, Michael," Melissa replied smugly. "These people were trying to get out of paying their bill." Michael, the restaurant manager, looked like he might faint. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, his voice suddenly respectful. "Sir, there's been a terrible mistake." The restaurant fell silent. Even the clink of silverware against plates stopped as diners turned to watch the scene unfolding by the kitchen doors. "Sir?" Melissa's confident smirk faltered. "You know these people?" Michael, the restaurant manager, straightened his tie nervously. "Melissa, this is James Montgomery and his family." Melissa's face remained blank. "James Montgomery," Michael repeated with emphasis. "The CEO of Montgomery Tech Solutions." A flicker of recognition crossed Melissa's face, but she shook her head slightly. "Okay, but that doesn't mean they can." "And as of 3 weeks ago," Michael continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "the owner of the Silver Spoon restaurant chain." The color drained from Melissa's face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. At a nearby table, a woman gasped and nudged her husband. "That's the Montgomery family," she whispered, not quite quietly enough. "His company just hit a $20 billion valuation." Phones discreetly emerged from pockets as other diners tried to snap photos without being obvious. There must be some mistake, Melissa finally managed, her voice small. The only mistake, Michael said firmly, was the service provided to Mr. Montgomery and his family tonight. He turned to James with an apologetic bow. Sir, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for this misunderstanding. Please allow me to move you to our best table immediately. James glanced at his family. David looked confused, while Zoe had a hint of satisfaction on her face at Melissa's shocked expression. Ava squeezed his hand again, silently telling him to handle this however he thought best. Michael, right? James asked the manager. Yes, sir, Michael Chen. We've spoken on the phone several times since the acquisition, but this is our first meeting in person. He extended his hand, which James shook firmly. I appreciate the offer of a better table, James said calmly, but I think we've lost our appetite. Of course, sir, I completely understand. Michael shot a withering glance at Melissa, who seemed frozen in place. Please know that this incident does not reflect our standards or values. A small crowd of kitchen staff had gathered by the doors, peering out at the commotion. Among them was the head chef, who stepped forward when he recognized James. Mr. Montgomery, the chef said, wiping his hands on his apron. I've been looking forward to cooking for you. Please reconsider staying. I'd be honored to prepare something special for your family. James considered this, looking at his children. What do you think, guys? Should we stay? David looked up at his dad with wide eyes. Does this mean we can sit by the windows now? Several people nearby chuckled, breaking some of the tension. Absolutely, Michael jumped in. The best table in the house is yours. Zoe, who had been mortified earlier, now stood a little straighter. I think we should stay, Dad. I'm still hungry. James looked at Ava, who nodded slightly. All right, James agreed. We'll stay. As Michael personally escorted them to a prime table overlooking the city lights, whispers followed them across the dining room. James heard snippets, just acted so normal, and didn't even name drop, and wearing regular clothes like everyone else. Once they were seated at their new table, with fresh drinks already being prepared by a nervous bartender, James noticed Melissa being led to the back office by another manager. Her shoulders were slumped, and she kept looking back at their table with an expression of pure dread. Dad, David asked, looking troubled as he watched Melissa disappear into the office. Is she going to get fired? James considered the question seriously. I don't know, buddy. But she was really mean to us, Zoe pointed out, still indignant. Yes, she was, Ava agreed. But everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. James watched as the door to the manager's office closed behind Melissa. He thought about the look on her face when she realized who they were. It wasn't just fear of losing her job, it was shame. Something about that made him pause. You know, he said thoughtfully, I think I need to have a conversation with management about how we handle this. What are you thinking? Ava asked, knowing that look in her husband's eyes. James smiled slightly. I'm thinking this might be an opportunity for something more important than just firing somebody. Melissa sat in the small back office, staring at her hands. They were shaking. The events of the past hour kept replaying in her mind like a bad movie she couldn't turn off. The Montgomery family. The owner of the restaurant. The way she had treated them. The memory made her stomach twist with shame. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Michael, the manager, poked his head in. They're asking for you, he said, his expression unreadable. Mr. Montgomery wants to see me. Melissa's voice cracked. The whole family, actually. Michael held the door open, clearly expecting her to follow. Melissa stood on wobbly legs. Are they going to fire me in person? She whispered. Michael just shrugged. That's not my call. But I should warn you, there's someone else joining the meeting. As they walked through the kitchen staff stepped aside, some shooting her sympathetic glances while others looked away. Word had spread quickly about what happened. They entered the private dining room where the Montgomery family now sat around a table with their meal finally served properly. But they weren't alone. A well-dressed woman Melissa didn't recognize sat beside Mr. Montgomery, a notepad in front of her. Melissa, please join us, James Montgomery said, gesturing to an empty chair. Reluctantly, she sat down, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "This is Patricia Williams," James introduced the stranger. "She's the HR director for all my companies, including the Silver Spoon chain." Melissa felt like she might throw up. An HR director meant official termination paperwork. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "I didn't know who you were. If I had known." "That's exactly the problem," Ava Montgomery interrupted gently. "The fact that you treated us differently because you didn't know who we were." Melissa's eyes dropped to the table. "I understand if you want me gone. I'll clean out my locker right now." "Is that what you think this is about?" James asked. "Firing you?" Confused, Melissa looked up. "Isn't it?" James exchanged a glance with his wife before continuing. "My son asked me an important question earlier. He wanted to know if you were getting fired." David, who had been quietly eating his properly cooked chicken fingers, looked up. "It didn't seem fair," he said simply. "People make mistakes." "Out of the mouths of babes," Patricia murmured, making a note on her pad. James leaned forward. "Melissa, I could easily have you fired. And honestly, part of me wanted to after how you made my family feel tonight." "I deserve it," Melissa admitted, her voice barely audible. "Maybe," James agreed. "But what would that accomplish, really? You'd lose your job, feel resentful, and probably go work at another restaurant with the same attitudes. Nothing would change." Melissa blinked in confusion. "Dad thinks there's a better way," Zoe explained, surprising everyone with her input. "He always says problems are just opportunities wearing ugly clothes." James smiled at his daughter proudly before turning back to Melissa. "Here's what I'm proposing. You have two options. First option, you take 2 weeks severance pay and find employment elsewhere." Melissa nodded, certain this was what she'd choose. "Second option," James continued, "you help us fix the larger problem." "What? What problem?" "The problem that made you look at my family and decide we didn't deserve the same service as your other customers," James explained. "The problem that exists in many restaurants and businesses. The problem of judging people based on appearance or race." Patricia spoke up. "Mr. Montgomery is implementing a new training program across all his hospitality businesses. We need someone who understands firsthand why this training is necessary." "You want me to take some diversity class?" Melissa asked, still confused. "I want you to help develop it," James corrected her. "Work with Patricia and our team to create training that addresses unconscious bias in customer service. Share your perspective, including what happened tonight, to help others learn." Ava added softly, "The best teachers are often those who've made mistakes themselves." Melissa looked around the table in disbelief. "Why would you give me that chance after how I treated you?" "Because," James said, glancing at his children with a small smile, "I want them to see that there are better ways to handle these situations than just punishment. I want them to know that people can change when given the opportunity." The offer hung in the air between them. Melissa stared at James Montgomery, trying to understand this man who had every reason to want her gone, but was instead offering her a path to redemption. So James said, "What will it be?" 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing night at the Silver Spoon. Melissa stood outside the restaurant's staff entrance, taking a deep breath before pulling the door open. Today was different from her usual shifts. Today was the first day of the new training program. "Morning, Melissa," called Jerry, one of the cooks, as she walked through the kitchen. His friendly greeting still surprised her. Before the incident, they had barely spoken beyond work necessities. Now, many staff members treated her differently, some with newfound respect, others with lingering suspicion. The back dining room had been transformed into a temporary classroom. Chairs were arranged in a circle, and a projector displayed the words "Excellence in Service" beyond expectations on the wall. Patricia Williams from HR was arranging papers on a small table. "Right on time," Patricia smiled. "The others should be arriving soon." Melissa nodded nervously. "I still can't believe I'm helping with this instead of looking for a new job." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. Instead of firing her, James Montgomery had kept his word. Melissa had spent days meeting with Patricia and a team of training specialists, sharing her story, the uncomfortable truth of how she had profiled customers and provided different levels of service based on appearances. The door opened and several staff members from various Montgomery-owned restaurants filed in, looking curious and slightly uncomfortable. Some Melissa recognized, Others were strangers. All had been selected for this first training group. "Good morning, everyone," Patricia began once everyone was seated. "Before we start, I'd like to introduce someone who has been instrumental in developing this program." All eyes turned to the door as James Montgomery himself walked in, dressed simply in slacks and a button-up shirt, not unlike what he'd worn that fateful night. "Thank you for being here," he said, his voice warm but authoritative. "What we're doing today matters more than you might realize." He glanced at Melissa with an encouraging nod before continuing. "I could talk about profit margins and customer retention, and those things matter in business. But what we're really discussing is dignity. Everyone who walks through our doors deserves the same respect and service, regardless of what they're wearing, what they look like, or how much money you think they have." The room was silent, everyone's attention fixed on James. "I'll let Patricia run the session, but first, Melissa has agreed to share something with you all." Melissa felt her heart pounding as she stood up. 3 weeks ago, the idea of speaking in front of a group would have terrified her. But something had changed. She had changed. "Hi everyone," she began, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger. "Most of you have probably heard rumors about what happened with the Montgomery family. I'm here to tell you those rumors are true, and worse than what you heard." She took a deep breath. "I saw a black family in casual clothes, and I decided they weren't worth my time or respect. I gave them the worst table, ignored their requests, served them cold food, and eventually tried to kick them out." Saying it out loud still made her cheeks burn with shame. "I did this to the owner of our restaurant and his family." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "But that's not the real problem," Melissa continued. "The real problem is that I've been doing this to customers for years. Anyone who didn't fit my idea of a good customer got second-rate service. I just never got caught until now." She looked around the room, making eye contact with her colleagues. "Mr. Montgomery could have fired me on the spot. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, he asked me a question that changed everything. Why did you treat us that way?" And for the first time, I had to really think about it. Melissa glanced at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. The truth was ugly. I had biases I'd never confronted. I made assumptions based on race and appearance. And I'm not the only one who does this, in restaurants, in stores, in hotels. It happens everywhere. The room remained silent, but she could tell from their expressions that her words were hitting home. "So that's why I'm here. Not because I'm some expert, but because I'm trying to be better. And maybe by sharing my story, I can help others avoid making the same mistakes." As Melissa finished speaking, James stepped forward again. "This training isn't about making anyone feel guilty. It's about growing, learning, and ultimately providing truly excellent service to every guest." He looked directly at Melissa. "It takes courage to confront your own biases. Thank you for that courage." As the training session began in earnest, Melissa felt something she hadn't expected. A sense of purpose. The worst mistake of her career had somehow become an opportunity to make a real difference. 6 months later, the Silver Spoon buzzed with excitement. The restaurant had been closed to regular customers for the evening and transformed for a special event. Round tables filled the dining room, each decorated with elegant centerpieces and place cards for the guests of honor. Local entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities who had been invited to a networking dinner hosted by Montgomery Tech Solutions. Melissa adjusted her new name tag, which now read Melissa Porter, Service Training Director. The title still felt strange sometimes, but a good kind of strange. In the past 6 months, her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. "How does everything look?" Michael asked, surveying the room with her. "Perfect," she replied. "The staff is ready, kitchen's prepped, and the guest list is confirmed." After the incident with the Montgomery family, Melissa had thrown herself into the training program development. What started as a way to keep her job had turned into genuine passion. She'd helped create a comprehensive approach to service that was now being rolled out across all 15 restaurants in the Montgomery Hospitality Group. More importantly, she changed. The woman who once judged customers by their clothes or skin color now saw people first, their stories, their dignity. The front door opened, and James Montgomery entered with his family. Zoe and David had grown noticeably taller in the past 6 months. Ava walked beside James, elegant in a simple evening dress. "Mr. Montgomery," Melissa greeted them with a genuine smile. "The team is ready for tonight." "Melissa," James corrected her gently, "we've been working together for months now. Please call me James." She nodded, still not quite used to that either. "The guests should start arriving in about 15 minutes. "Perfect timing," James replied. "Actually, I was hoping you might personally handle our table tonight, for old time's sake." Melissa caught the twinkle in his eye and laughed. "I'd be honored. I promise much better service this time around." As she walked away to check on final preparations, David tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, is that really the same lady who was mean to us before?" James knelt down to his son's level. "It is. What do you think about that?" David considered this seriously. "She seems nice now, and she smiles more." "People can change when they learn better ways," James explained. "Sometimes they just need a chance." Guests began arriving, men and women from all backgrounds who had started businesses in everything from tech to catering to construction. Many looked slightly awestruck to be in the same room as James Montgomery, but he greeted each one warmly, making sure they felt welcome. Once everyone was seated and the first course had been served, James stood to address the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "Looking around this room, I see the future of business in our city. Innovative ideas, fresh perspectives, and determination. But I also know that many of you have faced barriers that someone like me never had to deal with." He paused, his eyes finding Melissa as she quietly supervised the service. "Before we continue with dinner, I want to share a story about this very restaurant. 6 months ago, my family and I came here for dinner dressed in casual clothes. We were seated by the kitchen, given poor service, and eventually asked to leave." Murmurs traveled through the room. "The waitress who did this had no idea who we were," James continued. "She made assumptions based on how we looked and treated us accordingly. It's something many of you have probably experienced." Nods of recognition came from several tables. "But rather than simply firing her, we tried something different. And I'd like to introduce you to that waitress now, Melissa Porter, who is currently the service training director for our entire restaurant group." Surprised faces turned toward Melissa, who stepped forward with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Melissa, would you mind sharing what you've learned these past 6 months?" James asked. Taking a deep breath, Melissa addressed the room. 6 months ago, I made the worst mistake of my career. But it turned out to be the most important lesson of my life." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "That night showed me biases I didn't even know I had. Working with the Montgomery family has taught me that true service means seeing the dignity in every person who walks through our doors." As she spoke, Melissa noticed James' children watching her intently. David gave her a small wave, which she returned with a smile. "The training program we've developed isn't just about restaurant service," she concluded. "It's about creating spaces where everyone feels valued. And that change starts with people like me recognizing our own biases." As Melissa finished speaking, James raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to the power of second chances."